You're listening to Alamo City Limits Podcast with Noah Magaro-George, the official San Antonio Spurs podcast of Pounding the Rock in SB Nation.
What's going on, Spurs fans? Welcome back to Alamo City Limits, the official San Antonio Spurs podcast of SB Nation and Pounding the Rock. As always, I'm your host, Noah Magaro-George, and that's my co-host, Damien Bartonek. And today we have another very special guest to talk about the NBA draft with us, Keandre from Hoop Intellect over on YouTube. Man, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I appreciate y'all for having me on the show.
Yeah, man, we're excited. Like, we were talking beforehand, before we started recording and everything, and Dame's really excited. I'm excited. We watched all your YouTube videos during the pandemic. Like Dame said, you kind of got us through that stuff, man.
Facts.
Great stuff. So, like, Spurs fans, check out his YouTube channel. Really great breakdown. Great stuff. Not just NBA draft, but NBA, all sorts of basketball content. Really good stuff. But, man, we'll hop into this. So, our listeners are aware. We're recording this podcast May 8th. It's about almost 10 p.m. Central Time, but Spurs fans probably know this by now. San Antonio's in the back of the lottery. That's a third straight year franchise record, and that means we have a ton to talk about with Keandre. We broke down mid-lottery guards last week, and this week we're going to look at three of the best forwards in this class. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive into Kendall Brown, Jeremy Sochan, or Sochan, actually, sorry, and the last one is going to be Tari Eason. Now, we did this exercise last week, but we want to get your opinion. So of these three guys, how would you rank them, according to each other? 1, 2, 3, where do you have them in relation to each other? And then we'll break them down depending on how you rank them.
Yeah, so out of these three, first I would have Tari Eason. Second, I would have Jeremy Sochan. And then I would have Kendall Brown third. Now, Tari and Jeremy Sochan are pretty close towards the mid to late lottery for me. So I have Tari 13th, I have Sochan 14th, and then Kendall Brown is in sort of that 20 to 25 area. I have a big board coming soon this week, so those will be finalized soon. But Kendall Brown is in that kind of 20 to 25 range for me. But that's kind of how I have it.
Awesome. Dame, how do you see it? How do you have them ranked in relation to one another?
I have Sochan at number 1, and then Eason at 2, and then Kendall Brown at 3. We'll talk more about Kendall Brown. We'll probably start with him, I'm assuming. But yeah, I think for me, that's kind of just how I'm seeing it right now. I think I was telling you, Noah, earlier in the week how they kind of have like similar offensive limitations for me right now, like Sochan and Eason out the gate. But I think Sochan has a little bit higher upside, but we'll go into that later.
For sure, and I think just to round things out here, so on my big board, my personal big board, it only goes to 40 right now. I've been working on it, but right now I've got Jeremy highest at 11th, and then I've got Kendall at 15th, and I'm sorry, I also have Tari at 12th, so Tari's the highest, but those are sort of interchangeable for me, Jeremy and Tari. I like both of them for different reasons, so let's go ahead and start with, I guess, the guy who everybody's lowest on, and that's not to say that we don't like this guy, but let's go ahead and start with Kendall Brown. So, Keandre, tell us a little bit about Kendall Brown. Spurs fans probably aren't that aware of, what his skill set is on the offensive end. We'll start there. Unless you're a big Baylor fan and you're a Spurs fan, you probably don't know much about him. So break him down a little bit offensively. What are some of his strengths? What are his translatable skills in the NBA? And then what are some things that he really needs to work on?
Yeah, so the first thing that really pops when you watch Kendall Brown is his athleticism. He's one of those guys who once he gets to his spot in the lane, he can really explode off of 2 feet. He can get up off of 1 as well, but definitely off of 2. And when he gets up, it's a sight to behold for sure. He was one of the best cutters in the country, shot nearly 80% on cuts, 1.5 points per possession. And of those with at least 50 possessions, that ranks 6th in the country. So, he's one of those guys who can really, he does a great job of reading what's going on and really making a play and finding those gaps in the defense. And then, as we were talking, just kind of those things that he is great at offensively, you kind of got to look at some of his limitations. So, being able to knock down a 3, that's not really one of his strongest suits at this point. But on the flip side of that, he's somebody who has great feel. He's somebody who might not be a primary playmaker, somebody who's creating a ton of opportunities for others in the half court, but he does have a high feel for the game. He does make great passes out of, rebound opportunities, different sets that they would run, dribble handoffs, things of that nature. He can find the open man and things like that. So, with him, it's just kind of a all-around thing offensively where you're betting on his feel for the game, what he can do in terms of that area. But there are some limitations that he has right now that I think that you'll just kind of work on and you want to see through over time.
Definitely. And I think I agree with you for the most part there on what you're saying about him. And I love that you mentioned his cutting. So you said he was 6th in the nation, shot 79.2% on cuts, 94th percentile in NCAA basketball Division I this season. I thought that really stood out. And I like that because right now, as you mentioned, not really much of a shooter. I know he shot a better percentage than a guy like Jeremy Sochan did, but he was really reluctant, right? He passed up a lot of open threes, didn't really seem that interesting shooting. But the thing I did like that it seemed, even though the form wasn't like perfect, not like the most smooth motion, it definitely seems like, and this is probably a cop-out to a degree, but getting into an NBA system where you get to work with somebody like Chip England, because I imagine if you take him 9th, he's probably more prioritized than somebody like a Trey Jones who went 41st, or maybe even someone like Joe Wieskamp who went 41st. So I'd like to see what he looks like there. As far as like the self-creation stuff, I didn't think he really created that much for himself or that well from himself from what I saw, but I like some of the other stuff, the intangibles. It seemed like he had a good feel for the game. And I don't know if, and you can answer this question for me probably, and I'm sure Dame has other questions, but basically from what I watched, it seemed like maybe at the next level, I'm not sure to what volume, but he might be able to run some inverted pick and rolls where it's like he's the guy who's running the pick and roll, like 5-4 pick and roll, maybe some 5-1 pick and roll, like him and a guard. But I thought he had decent feel as a passer. Like you said, not a guy who's, a primary engine of an offense or anything like that, no high rep, but it felt like he's a really high IQ player, and I like that, and I like what he has going for him in that aspect.
Yeah, for sure. There are some things that he's going to have to work with. I like what you touched on with Chip England. I think that's going to be kind of a theme with all three of these players where, maybe if they go to a different system, you wouldn't be as confident in them kind of developing a really consistent or at least league average three-point shot. But in a system like San Antonio has, you feel really confident about that coming along. But yeah, just kind of touching on that feel, his ability as a passer once again. I don't know if he really has sort of secondary potential even. I think he's just more somebody who really fits within the framework of an offense and can make plays out of that. So, just ball reversals, some of the things that you said, I see him kind of more of a wing than these other two guys. I think that they, more seamlessly fit in the front court, just a little bit better just size-wise. But yeah, there's a lot there that you like you said, high IQ, high feel for the game, and there's a lot of ways that I think that you can use him, especially with that athleticism, being 6'8", the speed that he has, the ways that he can get out in transition and score the ball. That's a big part of his game that you really like, especially with guys like, Keldon Johnson, DeJounte Murray, pushing the pace. So there is a lot there to like with him.
Yeah, and I think for me, one thing that kind of stood out when watching Kendall Brown is, as an athlete, he's sensational. One thing that I was talking to Noah about was I was kind of surprised at how he didn't really create a lot of separation off the dribble. You'd think, obviously, ball handling is a lot more than just being a great athlete. But you would think at the next level, if he can kind of work on that a little bit, there's upside there, right? Even as a catch and shooter, I think there's upside there. But I think right now he's just really, really raw offensively. In the half court, I like what he does off the ball, but I would love to see some more off ball or on ball reps for him, whether it's in the G League or wherever he lands. But I would agree with what both of y'all say. One thing that kind of stood out to me, kind of looking up on Kendall Brown too, is according to NBA Draft.net, around the rim he finished at 78%. So, that's pretty impressive for a guy that, in my opinion, isn't necessarily very crafty off the dribble. You know what I mean? So I think there's some things to like here. And like Noah mentioned, just because he's third according to all of us, that doesn't mean he's a bad prospect or anything like that. But I think he's definitely kind of like that long-term developmental pick that some Spurs fans probably aren't feeling right now, especially not at number 9. That's just kind of there. I think Noah, they're pretty much done with the Josh Primo and all those other kind of guys right now.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of good things there. Even going back to Sunrise, that's just never really been a part of his game, being able to create off the dribble and things of that nature for himself. Now, when he had some great moments where he would use push crosses, get all the way to the basket. I remember a play specifically where he rejected a screen against Alabama that really stood out in my mind. But, that's going to be something that has to come along in the G League and might take a little bit more time and might not have been there as much as the other two guys. So a bit of a project, especially at the 9th pick, but I think especially for the 20 and 25, if he lasts that long, that's somebody who you could really get a lot of value with. So, especially with the Spurs, I really like him in that kind of situation.
Before we transition, I was going to ask to both of y'all. Number one, if the Spurs hypothetically were to trade back in the lottery, my first question would be, do you think that's a guy that they should look at? And number two, my other question is, do you think he's a high floor prospect? Because I think the other two we're going to talk about are very high floor prospects. But Kendall Brown, I'm kind of unsure. I would like to get y'all's opinion on that.
I think it's interesting. At least, again, like just to be 100% clear. So this year I haven't done as much draft stuff as I have in years past. Like for all these guys, I took their 5 highest game scores from Basketball Reference and their 5 lowest scores, and then I watched all those games, those 10 games on Synergy, made notes. So like I am missing quite a bit of information, which is exactly why we have Keandre. But from my point of view, it seemed like for me defensively, I think his ceiling and his floor is a lot higher than it is offensively. Like one of the other things that really stood out for me is, yes, I think he has some potential to create for others, but it did seem like when he put the ball on the floor and when he was cut off, he had a tendency to just sort of like continue bowling through guys. He committed a lot of charges that way. Didn't love that. Another thing that I didn't necessarily, I'll go positive. One of the things I did really like was something that Keandre mentioned, where rebounding, especially off of offensive rebounds, he was really quick to kick it right back out. Like he seemed to know where guys were on the floor. He made the right read really quick, got it to a shooter, they knock a shot down. I like that. But as far as his ceiling goes, I think he does have a fairly high ceiling, but I don't know overall offense and defense. I don't know about his floor. Like I think if the shot doesn't come around, I don't really know how much value he has long term, especially if he's not like a ball handler or anything more than like a connector piece.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the reason why he is third for us. It's just you don't have the same type of confidence in him, developing that handle for more than just, transition, pushing the ball up the floor, making that second move when he gets cut off, or, being confident when you're pressured, heavy by the defense. So just a lot of different things. I think we probably should touch a little bit more on his defense, what he can do on that end, because that's a big part of his appeal, right? At 6'8", he could reasonably guard down really well, probably as well as any of the other guys we'll talk about. Has pretty good awareness off the ball in terms of grasping help defense, help to helper, tagging the roll, things of that nature. Now, there were some lapses that he had throughout the season where he would just kind of get caught up watching the ball and, being too invested or interested in what was going on there. They led to some back cuts and things like that. But, overall, I really like him on this end, and that's a big part of his appeal. I was wondering what you guys thought, your perspective on him.
Yeah, Dame, did you want to go or do you want me to go?
No, that's you, bro.
Yeah, I really liked him defensively. I agree with you. I don't think he's a guy who will switch up like 4 and 5. It did seem like when he was guarding bigger players that they sort of pushed him around. I know he's 6'8". I think he, at least according to Baylor's website, he's like 205. So he is kind of skinny, but he has really good feet. You could see the burst. You could see the lateral mobility. I think that's really intriguing, especially for a guy who I think you're probably right is more of a wing than he is a forward. But that sort of switchability at that size, I think that makes him, pretty scheme versatile. Like if you do want to call him a forward, he's not like a traditional drop coverage big where that's all he can do. He can probably do that, and he can, switch on the perimeter. So I liked him a lot. And one of the other things that you had mentioned was the ball watching. I didn't think it was that bad. He had one really bad game against Iowa State where he got beat backdoor like I think 3, 4, 5 times in that game. And I was like, ooh, that was bad. But really outside of that game, like the other games I watched, I thought he was good there. I thought he was pretty aware. He was good in the passing lanes. Overall, I mean, I just think he offers a lot with his tools and his IQ. And I think that's what is going to help him really succeed as a defender at the next level. That's what I'm buying in.
Yeah, and like I was mentioning earlier with the athletic profile, like Noah mentioned, like you both have mentioned, I mean, just from his sheer athletic ability, I mean, he's going to be relatively versatile. I mean, he's not, heavy-footed. He's a great athlete, whether it's north, south, east, west. And I think as well, one thing that's really interesting is mentioning how he's more of a wing. I could definitely get down with that. I mean, I believe he's 6'8" with a 6'11" wingspan as well. So I think there's definitely a lot of versatility there for him defensively. And like you guys have mentioned, that's a really big part of why you're buying into him and his development long term. It's because you're gonna get a chess piece, a Swiss Army knife defensively. So I think there's definitely a lot to like there. And like I've mentioned 100 times, athletically, man, that's kind of what really selling me, and something that really stuck out to me is just how great of an athlete. I believe I was watching I forgot who I was listening to earlier this morning about Kendall Brown. They basically said like he's one of, if not like the best pure athlete in the class. And I mean, that gives a lot of teams a lot to work with, just from a pure like archetype perspective, in my opinion.
Definitely. And what we can sort of talk about him a little bit more, but I think you would agree a little bit, Keandre, here, that he is very much like a defense to offense guy. Like once he comes away with a turnover, forces a turnover, you're probably not going to stop him in transition. You'll probably foul him. Not a great foul shooter, not like an awful foul shooter, but like most of the time he's going to finish in transition. I think that fits really well with the Spurs in the sense that, as you mentioned, they have guys like DeJounte Murray, Keldon Johnson, even like a guy like Trey Jones. Like these guys are forcing turnovers. They're going the other way, and the Spurs really thrived in transition. And so as a player, defense to offense for a team that really needs a guy who's about that 6'8", 6'9" size. Like they just really need that size, that versatility, and a guy who sort of fits their defensive identity. And I think he fills like certain holes that Doug McDermott obviously had as a defender. Now, is he a shooter like Doug McDermott? No. He's not going to add anything on that end right away, but I do appreciate what he brings on the defensive end. And I think if I had to be honest, I'd much rather see him out there, 20 minutes per game than see Doug McDermott out there for 20 minutes, 25 minutes per game. I'm tired of the Doug McDermott experiment. Love him as a player. Dad's a great coach. He's a coach's son, all that good stuff. But I don't know. I wasn't in love with what I saw with him and Keldon at the 3 and 4. I don't think that works.
Yeah, I think you get a lot of versatility with Kendall Brown in there, and you just got to think of like the idea of having maybe a lineup with, you've got Devin Vassell, Kendall Brown, Keldon Johnson out there, wreaking havoc on the wings, being able to switch. Obviously, all of them like to play the passing lanes, to get out in transition. So that's something that could be really enticing long term, as he continues to develop and get more of a defined role offensively and kind of fit into that framework better.
Dame, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or you want to move on to the next guy?
We can go to Tari Eason. That's who we had he had next. So yeah, let's move on to that.
Yeah, we can move on to Tari. So we'll do the same exercise with Tari. What do you like about him offensively? What part of his game is translatable? And, what are some things, again, like these guys are not perfect. Nobody's perfect. No prospect is perfect. So what does this guy need to work on a little bit heading into the next level?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really like with Tari, he's a wrecking ball of a driver. He's, one of those guys who is sort of a will player, kind of just imposes his will and is able to get to the basket with regularity. Out of all of these players, he's probably the most adept at creating at the moment. Now he's got 2 years in age on him, so that's definitely a significant thing, but that's one of the differentiators at this point. He's not super controlled or polished at this point, but just being able to, like I said, get a touch in the paint and possibly make a read to set up his teammates, that was definitely there in flashes. He's one of the better transition players in the country, about 1.3 points per possession, shot over 68%. He was always looking to get out and run, and he might end up dunking on you if you make the wrong decision. But yeah, that's kind of the main things. And then, obviously defensively, he's got a lot of versatility. I think we'll get to that. But talking about some of the things offensively that, maybe he could work on, I think, he can definitely do a better job of finishing at the bucket. He shot 55% at the basket in the half court, which is only like a few shots better than Jabari Smith. Now, Jabari's issue had to do with, being able to get there and actually get those attempts under the rim, but which is not Tari's problem at all. But he did have some difficulties, trouble, elevating in traffic at times, and just being able to have that sort of touch around the basket and feel, and also just developing some control and cutting out those, bad decisions, kind of getting into traffic in no man's land or not having a plan, getting those charges, things of that nature. But, yeah, that's kind of the rough gist on Tari. I want to know what you guys think and your observations so far on him.
Yeah, I think for me and Noah have discussed numerous times on this podcast how the Spurs essentially, they just need guys that are 6'8", 6'9", 6'7", long wingspan, versatile, can do just about anything for you defensively. I think Tari Eason offers you that kind of right out of the box. What really impressed me was how much better he improved, not only just overall as a shooter, in my opinion, as a scorer, but I mean just for him in general. Like he shot 36% from three this year and 80% from the line. I know like free throw percentage isn't always like the go-to indicator of whether someone's going to be a great shooter or not. But typically, whenever guys are shooting that well from the line, I think that kind of translates well as a shooter at the next level. So I think just in general, I really, really like how kind of, not necessarily polished, but he really does play well to his strengths. And I think for me, that kind of creates an illusion. Like, you could say he's polished as a player, but I still think there's a lot of upside, a lot of things for him to grow in his game. So I really liked what I saw. I think from just an archetype perspective at 6'8" with a 7-foot wingspan, I mean, the opportunities, the possibilities are endless there. I think he fits exactly what the Spurs need. And I think he has a unique blend of not only upside, but the ability to come in and play right away as well. So that's kind of what I took from it, Noah and Keandre, and I would love to hear, what y'all think.
Yeah, I liked him quite a bit, and this is kind of why I go back and forth between him and Jeremy. There are things that I think Jeremy might one day be able to do that make him more valuable long-term. But I did really like with Tari is, out of the three of them, definitely the most physical driver, was really adept at getting to the free throw line. I believe he got there 13.3 times per 100 possessions. Clearly not afraid to embrace contact, seek out contact, and he didn't commit that many charges, so it didn't really feel like he was out of control. But one of the things that you mentioned is, he needs to get better at finishing at the rim. And one of the biggest things, as you mentioned, I think it is the lift in a crowd, but I also think it's him being really, really right-handed. It felt like he always was trying to get back to his right hand. He didn't finish that well with his left hand at the rim. And even when he was driving to his left, it felt like he was always trying to go, okay, let me see how I can get the ball back into my right hand. And it just didn't work that well for him. I don't know if that's kind of what you took away. Again, I've only watched 10 games for each of these guys, but from what I watched, that felt like a problem for him. So could you maybe tell me, is that relatively accurate to what you saw, or did you feel like he was more, I guess, ambidextrous than I'm giving him credit for?
No, that's 100%. You're on it. In those 10 games, he definitely picked up on one of his bigger issues. Along with driving to the left and being able to make something happen, he definitely struggled at being super right-handed, and you could tell it showed in the finishing numbers too. So that was a big thing. One thing I would also add is just kind of being able to shoot that pull-up. He doesn't really have a lot of that in his game quite yet. Now, I do like his handle, especially relative to these other guys. There was some moments where he would, put together some crossovers and get all the way to the basket, or even, shoot a couple step-back jumpers and things of that nature that you really like to see. Again, going into the NBA, some of that is going to have to, go away for a little bit. It's going to have to take some time before he can really add that to his game. But it's something that you definitely like to see. But like the other two as well, defensively, he really has a lot of versatility and a lot of value, especially in this San Antonio situation. I think he slides right into that 4 spot, and you can do a lot of different things with him. And I also think he's probably the most ready to contribute right now.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Oh yeah, no,
Go ahead, Dame.
Yeah, I was gonna say too. You guys both mentioned the free throws, his ability to kind of draw contact, get to the line. The Spurs were last in free throw rate in 2021, so I think immediately that he's offering something there. Before I kick it to you, I want to ask you a couple questions. Same questions I asked with Kendall Brown. At 9, do you guys think that's a really good pick for the Spurs? And not only that too, do you think he's a guy that not only, we've mentioned he can come in right away, but do you think he's a guy that can come in and start right away, or do you think that he would need to come off the bench? Now I know Pop would probably bring him off the bench, but I think hypothetically, do you think you could see him starting right away?
I could see it. I think there would be some just lineup difficulties just based on shooting and spacing and things like that. I could see it, especially defensively. I think that he'll be able to be just fine from the jump, especially when you got guys like DeJounte out there leading them and Pirtle on the back end being able to be that guy that he is. But also, I wanted to touch on what you said about him as a shooter. So he shot 57% from the free throw line his freshman year, comes back, shoots 80% on way more volume. That is a very great indicator, and at least he's making progress. That's a big jump for somebody to make from the freshman to sophomore year. And then again, going into that Spurs program, you have to be confident in what they can do development-wise. I do think there are some mechanical issues in there. We won't have to get all the way in depth in that, but yeah, that improvement from one year to the next is definitely something that you like to see. I'm just kind of talking about his overall game, what he can eventually bring to the table in the NBA.
And I think, like, as far as his jump shot goes, this is probably an exaggeration to a certain degree, but it kind of reminds me of how I shoot a basketball. Like, I don't shoot a basketball like picture perfect form. I kind of shoot it a little bit on the right side of my body. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of like Matt Bonner, how Matt Bonner used to shoot on the side of his head. Now, it's probably not, it's not that exaggerated, but also he's not like a Matt Bonner level shooter. Like, he's not shooting that volume. He's not shooting that percentage. And I think maybe it won't, but it definitely felt like it limited him as a pull-up shooter. Like, it wasn't like the quickest motion. It is on the right side of his face. So it kind of felt like, okay, if he's driving right and he pulls up right, not really that big of an issue. But if he's driving left and he pulls up, it felt like he got a lot more of those shots blocked or at least altered where they just didn't look very good. So I don't know how that translates. I'm sure that's something that maybe they can work out. They like we mentioned, I mean, they've helped a guy like DeJounte Murray, not a jump shooter whatsoever. Now he's one of the best mid-range shooters in the NBA, coming along as a three-point shooter. Keldon, he was a fairly good shooter at Oak Hill. He was a fairly good shooter at Kentucky. And now he's, one of the best standstill stationary shooters in the NBA. So you don't necessarily need Tari to be a guy who's pulling up from everywhere, a motion shooter, running off screens or anything like that. But I have confidence that, if you get him in San Antonio's system, he's working with a guy like Chip England. He's with this developmental staff. I like him a lot. And so what you asked, Dame, is, would he be a pick that you like at 9? I think yes, I would be fine with him at 9, just so long as like other guys who are on my personal big board are not there anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if other guys are still available that I like more, then yeah, I think, okay, maybe we go with those guys. The only exceptions I would probably make, and maybe this is right, maybe this is wrong, but like if Benedict Mathurin is still there and maybe a guy like Johnny Davis is still there, maybe you go to a certain degree a little bit more with your positional need than a fit, because I don't know if you can pass up on Tari for a Johnny Davis, who I like him. I just don't know if he makes a lot of sense for San Antonio and the players they already have on the roster.
Yeah, I think that makes, and another thing too, like, I know when we had Corey on last week, we were talking like, hypothetically, if Shaedon Sharpe was there at 9, right, would you take him? And it was like, oh, it's a no-brainer. I think like unless there's something like that there, yeah, I think you go with Tari Eason, or I mean Jeremy Sochan, if you want to kind of move in that direction. I think that would be a pick that I'm really down with, and I think personally, man, the upside is real, but I think Tari right out the box gives you a lot more from day one.
I think he does too.
Yeah, I was going to say, the same thing. Basically, there's a lot of prospects that are kind of similar in sort of that same range right there. So unless it's a guy like Shaedon Sharpe, you're not really going to make too many different decisions on that front. Like the guys you mentioned, Johnny Davis, Benedict Mathurin, I would rather personally, just for the Spurs, have Tari, Sochan, these kind of guys in that range. Just given what we talked about, the defensive versatility, to be able to do a lot of different things. And you already have DeJounte, you already have Devin Vassell, you got Keldon Johnson, who you really like, then are, similar in age. So that'd be the direction that I go in.
Yeah, I think that is the right decision to make. And I think lastly, because I don't know how much we touched on this, but like Tari Eason, out of these 3 guys, by far the best event creator. I mean, steal percentage, block percentage, even if you go just by blocks per 100 possessions, steal per 100 possessions, like he's a guy who's going to create a lot of havoc. And I'd love to see how that looks like next to a guy like DeJounte, who is similar. Like, he is an event creator. He does come up with a lot of steals. It does lead to fast breaks. And that is sort of San Antonio's identity right now is, okay, let's get in transition. Like, they're rebounding, they're running. They're trying to create stops. They're trying to force turnovers, and they're running. They ran, I think, at the 3rd fastest pace in the NBA last season. I think he makes a lot of sense for a position that, 1, it's a position of need. 2, there is upside there. And 3, he does fit your identity. So I like him a lot. But Dame, you can go ahead and move us along to Jeremy if you want, unless you have anything else that either of you really want to say about Tari.
Yeah, I think it's nice that we go here with Jeremy Sochan. Someone that was the first guy that I actually watched in preparation for this week. And no, I threw out a couple of comps like earlier in the week whenever I was telling you, and I liked what the Ringer had. Like, the Ringer had like some shades of like Draymond Green. Personally, I know this is kind of crazy because he's not in like a below the rim player, but I think below the rim he like reminds me a lot of like the way Aaron Gordon plays. I've seen that comp thrown out a little bit. I've seen a Kyle Kuzma comp that I was not feeling. I don't see no Kyle Kuzma in Sochan's game. But I think just in general, as an athlete, again, he offers you so much. And not only that too, defensively, we've mentioned, defense with all three of these guys. He's just as versatile as all of them, and potentially even a little bit more. And I think, too, one thing that just really kind of stood out to me was how much I've mentioned and how much Noah and I have mentioned how the Spurs need those guys that are 6'8", 6'9", plus defenders. Noah, you've mentioned how like Tari's like an event creator. I think Sochan is whatever you think that is, and then some, right? I think Jeremy's everything you think that is, and then some. Like, I think there's just so much versatility there, and I think offensively we still don't kind of know where that ceiling is, right? We're a little bit unsure. He's going to be someone that 2, 3, 4 years down the line, I think you're going to kind of really start to see kind of come into his own. I think honestly he's one of those guys that I mentioned this to Noah, prior to the show, that he's a guy that some people think he's a high floor and a high ceiling kind of guy, and I could see that as well. I think off the ball he can offer you a lot. Defensively, again, right out of the gate he can give you a lot. So for me, he's someone that I think San Antonio at pick number 9. Unless a Shaedon Sharpe is there, I wouldn't be surprised if they went that route. I think he just makes too much sense. But Keandre, I'll kick it to you, and let me know what you think about him and kind of his fit in San Antonio.
Yeah, so just kind of starting with the defense, outside of Chet Holmgren, who I think we can all agree is probably the best defensive prospect in the class, I think Jeremy Sochan might be the number 2. Just his combination of lateral quickness, the physicality, versatility, and feel are off the charts. I think he's someone who could realistically hang with 3 positions full time and then switch on to a lot of 1s and then against 5s and hold his own. We saw him towards the second half of the season when there was injuries, kind of play the 5 a little bit more and really shine in that role. Also, offensively, one thing that I really liked out of him was the passing flashes. He's not the most polished, definitely has his share of misreads and bad errors or whatever for a young player. But again, at that size, just the precision and feel and ability to create things for others off the dribble, that was excellent in my opinion. And you couldn't really ask for more, because when you start asking for more, then you get into like the Scotty Barnes type of territory, which is obviously different level of kind of point forward type of player. But the way that he can fit into the framework of an offense and attack a closeout, be able to make that play, drop-offs to the big, maybe a touch lob, things of that nature. He was able to do that pretty consistently. But yeah, that was kind of the thing with him. I think he had a good amount of flashes in terms of being a scorer and being able to get all the way to the basket, using his handle. He has some bump fades in there and turnarounds that I really like to see, that are really suggestive and encouraging towards his shooting potential. That's obviously one of the biggest swing factors, like you were mentioning. We don't really know where he kind of fits in completely on offense yet, and that shooting is a big part of that. But just kind of some of those flashes throughout the season and how he grew throughout the season and became one of their best players, if not their best player, that was something that you really like to see, and is a definite option at 9.
Yeah, I also really like Jeremy. I thought he has some potential to be a bigger playmaker, not like a full-time playmaker, more like and I hear people use this term, and I really like it, like a sort of connective tissue kind of guy, not a guy who's going to get you into your sets all the time or full-time, but a guy who can keep the ball moving. He can run plays. You can run some stuff from him. Maybe I'm wrong on this feel. I'm still sort of, everybody's figuring this prospect stuff out. Dave and I are figuring this all the time out as we watch film, but he does remind me a little bit at times of a guy like Thaddeus Young. Like, you wouldn't really use Thaddeus Young as like a full-time playmaker, but he's a good playmaking, a hub from like the high post, from the low post, from the elbows, that sort of stuff. So I do like him in that regard. I thought he might be able to run some pick and rolls too. He's a good finisher at the rim for the most part. Didn't get to the rim as much as a guy like Kendall Brown. He was a good cutter. I think he ranked in the 92nd percentile in cutting, but obviously on a much lower volume than Kendall Brown. But I think there's a lot of things he's good at, but nothing necessarily that he's like really great at the moment. But you do like the flashes, and I did like the shooting. Like you mentioned, he was able to sort of back guys down or sort of dribble into like that spin into a fadeaway. I thought that was intriguing. The only thing that bothered me is, at least like from the 10 games I watched, it never really looked like he ever just like straight up took a mid-range jumper off the dribble without like going into a spin. And it did feel like when he drove and went into spins, that as the season went on, some of the later games that I watched, like it seemed like people, okay, we know you're going to do that, and they were able to strip him or cut him off. Like, he didn't commit a lot of fouls or charge guys that often, but it did feel like, okay, that's a little predictable. What else do you have in your bag? So I am intrigued to see what else he has. I don't want to give off the impression that he's like a perfect prospect, but the upside, it's really, really intriguing. And as I'm sure we'll get into with his defense, that's really, honestly, for me, with all of these guys, that's what you're buying into is the defense, because they can all be really impactful, at least at a certain point in their career, because we know, coming in as a rookie day one, having a really positive impact, that's hard. Like that, most guys don't have a positive impact from year one.
Yeah, and I think, too, like Corey mentioned to us last week before I kick it to Keandre to tell us about his defense, Corey's mentioned us last week how, like, it's really hard to expect rookies or, like, just young players in general to be good at defense coming into the NBA because NBA defenses are so complex. But I think a guy like Sochan or even Tari Eason, like, in spots and stretches especially, they're going to flash that upside immediately right off the box, right? And so, Keandre, tell us a little bit more, though, about Sochan's defense, kind of what you see, what you like, and what he offers, San Antonio if they went there at 9.
Yeah, so, kind of like I was mentioning earlier, I think he's one of the best in the class. And obviously there is a huge growth curve for most rookies. That's why what Herb Jones did this season is so special. Guys like, even you throw like Davion Mitchell in there, what he's able to do at the point of attack. But it's very, very difficult for you to make an impact immediately. And I think that he can be a guy that does that at least on a consistent basis. It grows throughout the season, and by the end, you got somebody who's, really effective on that front. But, like I said before, 3 positions kind of full time, and then be able to switch on to ones, hold his own against 5s at times. I really liked his feel for the game and just ability to kind of read things from that back end of the defense, and also be able to kind of navigate screens at that size, which is a very unique quality. You don't really get to see that a lot. I love his foot speed. I think, that's excellent. I just think that he can guard a lot of different positions, and his versatility is going to be such a huge asset for them. And again, at that 4th spot for a team that already has some really, really good defenders, you might have the makings of something really, really special from that perspective.
Yeah, I love him defensively. I thought he had a really high feel for the game on this end. And honestly, as the season went on, I did get a chance to watch quite a few Baylor games this year. I only watched 10 full ones as we went back to watch film for this particular podcast. But my fiance, her whole family, they're big Kansas fans, so they watch a lot of Big 12 basketball. I watched a lot of Baylor basketball by default. And I really liked, it felt like as the season went on, he sort of became like the captain of the defense, like a vocal leader. And I thought it was pretty impressive for a team that top 4, top 5 in the nation, number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, a guy who was able to come in and sort of be that like floor general for you as a defender, as your like defensive anchor. That was really impressive. I thought he communicated really well. He talked to his teammates. He was directing traffic. And I just think at 18 years old, you don't really see that often. That was really impressive for me. So I like that. I like the switchability. I like the high IQ. And the other thing is, like, I think sometimes when, and this is not like in a bad way, but like when the casual fan watches basketball, they're sort of, looking like, okay, how many steals, how many blocks? And like, he's not a guy who had a ton of blocks per game or steals per game, but I think it's not all about event creation. Like being able to slide your feet with guys, cut them off on drives with your chest, force kickouts or force a tough mid-range shot and, late into a shot clock. Like being able to do those things, make life tough for guys, that's equally as valuable. And I thought he did that on a consistent basis. Really like him. Now, I don't think he's the same athlete that like a Tari Eason or a Kendall Brown is, but I think he had a better feel. I think he still has really good foot speed. The second jump, not great, not a great second jump, not a guy who you're going to see, I think, come away with a lot of rebounds in a crowd, but like you like the foundation that he has. And I really like Jeremy Sochan. And I hope that he's a guy who, if the Spurs end up going somewhere else at 9, I don't know if this is possible, but if he falls to 20, that they swoop him up. Because I would love to see him in a Spurs jersey, see what they can do with him long term.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I was going to touch on is kind of his like intensity and motor. I think that really shined in that UNC game and making that comeback. Obviously, he was kind of getting into it with Armando Bacot, and they kind of had their back and forth and everything. But just kind of being relentless and just constantly going at people and being able to make those rotations, like you said, it's not all about making those highlight blocks or being able to get in the passing lane every time. It might just be having good footwork on that closeout and not getting blown past. just things of that nature that he was really, really good at, but it doesn't really pop for a lot of people. That's Sochan in a nutshell.
Do you think, before we kind of tie this up, do you think that at 9, because I know you said something, you said that if hypothetically he dropped like to 20, the Spurs should take him. Do you think he's a guy that you would take over Tari at 9, or do you favor Tari at 9 over a guy like Sochan? Or is 9 too early for either one of those guys? What do you think? That's a question. That's a question I want to hear. That's an answer I need.
For the Spurs, those are guys that are like really high specifically for them team wise, because I do think that it's closer in terms of the other options that are there, and then you already have guys that are basically the same age. But yeah, it's like I said before at the beginning, like it's really close between him and Tari for me. I still haven't decided completely, but I'd be fine with taking Sochan at 9. And then if for whatever reason he does start to get to fall in, I would even consider trading up for him into those teams to be able to snag him.
Yeah, I can't say that I would disagree with anything you just said. It is a sort of a toss-up. Again, I think I said that earlier, but it is sort of a toss-up with him and Tari. I think right now I'm a little more high on Jeremy, depending on the day, just because I really like the upside there. But I think Tari might be a little bit of a safer pick. And not that that's necessarily something that the Spurs can afford to do. You know, we didn't see them go safe last year when they went with Josh Primo. They already had Devin Vassell and Trey Jones and Lonnie Walker and DeJounte Murray and Derek White. Like, they didn't care. They said, okay, we're loaded in the backcourt, but like, who's going to take us to the promised land? Like, no one. Like, DeJounte Murray emerged as an all-star. Awesome. But who else? So like, I'm fine with them taking a bet on a guy like Jeremy at 9. At the same time, I'm fine with Tari. Like, I wouldn't be upset with Tari at 9. But if the Spurs end up taking somebody and Sochan is there at 14, 15, try to trade up. I don't know how they could. It is hard to make trades in the NBA. It's not like it's harder than I think fans give like front offices credit for. Because Dame, you know this. Like, Spurs fans, year after year after year after year at the trade deadline, they're like, oh, trade deadline, Spurs aren't doing anything. Like, they're not making any trades. They're not on the phone. But like, we don't know that. Like,
yeah.
Like, you just simply don't know that. They probably are, but every year it's the same thing. Love Spurs fans, but it's like, okay, Lonnie's not playing that well right now. We don't even like Joe Wieskamp that much, and like, we have a first trade those guys and let's get like Dwayne Wade.
Yeah, facts.
Like,
yeah,
it's always for someone. It's like, get rid of our trash and let's get treasure. Like that, it doesn't work that way. I wish it did, because if it did, that the Spurs would be loaded by now. But it is tough. I'd love to see them trade up, but it's all about the price and do you have the assets to do that?
Yeah, I think too, this trading in the NBA is different from like the NFL, because the NFL you have 7 rounds and you can get quality players, starting caliber talents in 5, 6, 7, rounds 5 through 7. And in the NBA, man, it's 2 rounds, and typically, right, the top 3 or 4 is what you want, and then everything else you're kind of, it's a crapshoot. You know what I mean? And I think early in this process, I kind of fell into like the whole, San Antonio picking at 9. That's kind of no man's land, right? Like, that's not really good enough to get what they really need. That's too. They're just in a tough spot, right? But now, kind of going through this process, kind of looking at some more of these prospects, I think the Spurs really do have a shot to get a really solid player at 9 at a position of need, right? Like, whether it's Sochan or whether it's Eason, whether it's Kendall Brown, if they get him, later at 20 or 25, whatever the case may be. The Spurs are definitely in a position, and I think kind of the fan base should kind of take that perspective of, they really are in a pretty solid position to get a player that can come in and play right away, in my opinion. And one last thing though before I kick it back, the trade thing you mentioned though is funny, because it's like every year, right? Like, the Spurs should trade a first for Cam Reddish, right? Like, or the Spurs should trade 2 firsts and so for Domantas Sabonis. Like we wouldn't even be having Hoop Intellect on the show right now if they did something nonsensical like that. You know what I mean? So, yeah. But it's
they don't like Lonnie, but bring in Cam. Like, I like Cam Reddish too, but like, they have similar consistency issues. You're bringing in like a guy who's a little bigger. Honestly, this is not supposed to be like a bash Cam Reddish segment, so we won't talk about him. But I mean, it is interesting. We'll see what they do here. I do think they have a lot of like avenues towards getting better. Keandre, I guess we'll ask for an outside perspective. Like, you look at what the Spurs have on this roster right now. They add any of these 3 guys we're talking about. How much better does it make them year one? Probably, in my opinion, not that much better. And then long term, what does it do? Because I think I'm just looking, and I think I get labeled as like a resident pessimist a lot because like I just look at the rest. Like next year, the Clippers they'll have Paul George and they'll have Norman Powell and they'll have Kawhi Leonard back. Then you've got the Pelicans. Like, okay, now you get Zion back with the momentum they were able to make in the playoffs, and they have their like. It just feels like a lot of teams are going to be in a position to be better than they were a year ago, and they were lower than the Spurs in the standings. So what does it look like short term and then long term? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah, so I agree with you short term. I don't think that at 9 you're really going to get somebody who's moving the needle in that way, especially with the West getting tougher once again. You're going to have probably Portland being back with a vengeance, getting Dame back, Anthony Simons taking that jump. They're going to be better. The Lakers probably are going to be better. I don't know what they're going to end up doing, but can it be much worse than it was this year with LeBron and AD in them? I don't know.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so it's going to be kind of a longer process, but I think you get one of those guys at that spot that you can develop and bring along and hopefully get into those competitive games like you had this season. You see a lot of the young guys take strides this year. Towards the end of the season, Devin Vassell was looking like that guy that everybody was hoping for this whole time, especially offensively, knocking out shots like he was. But it's just kind of a process. I think you kind of have to just hope that one of these guys makes even a further leap, and it'll kind of jumpstart the process, like Keldon Johnson, if he can continue building on what he did this season and take that next step as a creator, a scorer, just being one of those more go-to guys. Then it's gonna make things go a little bit faster. But you're probably looking at the lottery again next year, and then I don't know. From there, there's a lot of players that I really like. So you be in a good position, and then it's just kind of free agency and whatever you can make happen on that end, or a trade possibly. But that's kind of the future outlook I kind of have on the Spurs. But you could be in a much worse position, that's for sure. I think that they've got a pretty bright future. That's just my outside opinion.
Yeah, I'm sure Spurs fans are happy to hear that. I mean, like, we like the Spurs. We're always a little bit skeptical about, where are they going to be in like a year or two? What is the ceiling of this team? Like, coming into the year, Dame and I were both like, this is like a 35, 34 win team, and they won like that many games basically. And it's not because we didn't think they were like competitive. Like, we knew they were going to be competitive. If like Greg Popovich is your head coach, he's going to get the most out of these guys. He's going to put them in a position where they're playing to their strengths, and like every single one of these guys, there's a clear identity, like not just in terms of their game, but in terms of like their psyche. They want specific kinds of guys in here, guys who are not going to hang their head after they lose, guys who are hungry to get better, guys who are, okay, next game. Like we don't remember that we just lost, our third straight clutch game. Like, we're ready to come back the next night, compete. And so I like that identity for them. I guess, like you mentioned, it's just about, who is going to take a leap. Does DeJounte have another one in him? Can he become a superstar? Because right now he's really just all-star territory. Well, he ended the season well. We'll see what he can do from there. Same thing with Keldon, like kind of like a fringe, third option, second option kind of guy. Can he make a leap? Like, that's a big deal. So internal growth, the drafting, the free agency, all that good stuff. Like, Dame, I mean, what do you see, man?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned earlier, like they're gonna get a really solid prospect, right? A really solid talent. Even a guy like Eason that I think can play right away, right? But no, in terms of moving the needle, I'm glad that that Keandre mentioned the Trailblazers, because I feel like they're gonna be much better than what they were. I mean, no, they weren't even an NBA team.
They phoned it in. Yeah,
they weren't even an NBA
team. Yeah, they like phoned
team.
it in.
Yes, like
for sure.
You know what I mean? And the Spurs played them 3 times down the stretch. You know what I mean? Like Oklahoma City. Like, shout out to my other friend Noah. We went to when they played the Spurs, and bro, like SGA sat like 10 minutes into the game. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just everything.
Giddey was out.
Yeah, like
JRE was out.
Yeah,
Lou Dort was out, and then the Spurs needed a buzzer beater from Lonnie, who was shooting like 27% that game to bail him out. Like, yeah, I get it. They didn't play well, but I did admire like that they are competitive. Like, you go back through the schedule, there's only 4 real blowouts on that entire schedule.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they pretty much, it was like you're either close win, close loss. They like almost never blew people out. They almost never got blown out. So it's interesting to see what step they take from here, because it does feel like they have flexibility, right? I mean, like outside of a guy like Doug McDermott, who's probably getting paid a little bit more than he should, and he's not necessarily the best fit. Like, you have a lot of flexibility. You can do a lot of things. So I'm confident they'll be better. It's just how much better, It's how much better.
Yeah, I mean, the competition around them is going to be so much better. Like the West is like you mentioned the Lakers, right? Like I would put some significant money the Lakers ain't missing the playoffs next year. They're going to, something's going to happen, right? I don't know how that's going to work, but something's going to shake. I don't know what it is, but just like that, the Clippers, like you mentioned, Noah, I just think in general, where the Spurs are at short term, I wouldn't expect them to be in the play-in, let alone the playoffs next year. And again, it's not to say they're not a good team or anything. I mean, they're a below average team right now, but I mean, just in general, the West is going to be getting much better. Where they're at, and the only way they can compete, in my opinion, is if someone takes that leap, and then maybe you get a little bit more from another guy, whether that's Vassell taking a jump or whatever the case it is, right? But yeah, I think right now Spurs fans and everyone shouldn't be looking at this as a 1-year rebuild. That stuff just doesn't exist in the NBA unless Luka Doncic and Giannis are coming, and I don't think they are. I can call them, maybe they will, but I doubt that they're going to answer. And I just think in general, man, this is a long-term plan, something that, when the trade deadline came and I mentioned that the Spurs attacked it like a rebuilding team and they did it the right way, that's essentially what it was, right? Like, that was beautiful, beautiful work, but this is a long-term plan, right? So I think just in general, wherever the Spurs go in this draft, no one should be expecting there to be, Tim Duncan and Monty walking through that door. But at the same time, you're in a good spot because you're developing talent that actually fits together. And eventually, something will probably come from it, in my opinion, whether it's a playoff appearance, a couple of them, whatever the case may be. I would trust this organization to take the right steps and eventually get back to their winning ways.
Yeah. I feel like I have sort of a connection to the Spurs. I want to see them do well because my mom was a Spurs fan. Well, she still is a Spurs fan for life. So that was kind of the team that I grew up watching. Some of my first basketball memories were that Spurs-Nets finals. So that's kind of the connection I got there. And then also, people don't know this, but I actually went to the same high school as R.C. Buford.
Okay.
So that's a random fact. And also, his dad actually helped me out going to college. He gave me a little scholarship that helped me out there too. So that's kind of my connection to the Spurs. So I always kind of got a little bit of a rooting interest there. So might be a little bit biased, but that's just what it is from the outsider perspective.
That's okay, and that's really awesome. And to be 100% honest, I think both of us, we try to be as objective as possible. We try to be really honest. We don't want to sell fans something that we don't believe. But I'll go ahead and go out on a limb here. I do think that the Spurs will be better next year. I do think that they will either be in the sort of higher tier play-in range or a very bottom playoffs team. I know that a lot of teams are going to get better, but I think the Spurs team will be better next year. And one of the reasons I feel like they will be better is they do have a level of familiarity with each other. They have gone through the grind together. And I think there is a certain degree of community, big brain thinking, right? Like, you get used to each other's tendency, you build a chemistry, you understand where your guys want to be on the floor, where they want to get the ball. And so I think you'll probably see some of that in conjunction with whatever they do this offseason. Again, they're going to have upwards of probably about $32 to $33 million to spend in free agency. They could move off of guys by trading them. They have flexibility in the draft. I just think that they will be better next year. I don't have an exact seed for you, but I do think they will be in that play-in to playoff range. But Dame, Keandre, unless either of you have anything you want to add to this or any other guys you want to talk about, we can start wrapping things up.
Yeah, I think for me, before I kick it to Keandre, I think the Spurs just in general, wherever they go in this draft, like I mentioned, they're gonna have a good chance to get a player that can contribute. But again, man, I think just what really shocked us all this past season, and Noah, kind of to your point about them, improving. If they're a better defensive team this year, I mean, who knows where they're at, right? I mean, they're a pretty poor defensive team for the first probably 50 games of the year, right? They're Noah and I, Keandre, on coming into the season, we were like, hey, the Spurs are probably going to be a bottom 5 to 8 offensive team and a top 10 defense probably. They're going to have the Knicks philosophy of just strong defense, really just efficient yet limited offense, and they'll kind of ride that wave and potentially, hey, we'll see what happens, right? Completely flipped, right? Offensively, they were really efficient for the bulk of the year, and defensively, respectfully, these guys are much better athletes than I ever will be, but they were awful defensively, right? It's just, this is call a spade, right? If it wasn't Jakob Poeltl, it was a wrap, right? So I think in general, if the Spurs are a better defensive team and they draft, guys, all of them who we've mentioned are great, defensive prospects, who knows what they can do, right? So that's kind of my final thoughts on the entire discussion.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, Noah asked me to kind of have some other people in mind, possibly for this ninth pick. I think Keegan Murray kind of fits this same sort of realm. Now, his draft stock really ballooned and it skyrocketed towards the end of the season. I've seen people have him as high as fifth in their mock drafts, big boards, things of that nature. So it might be a little bit more of a stretch for him to fall down to 9, but I think you look at him, he's a lot more polished offensively, a little bit older than the rest of these guys, but kind of fills that role just a little bit better offensively, and it also gives you a lot of, that event creation like you mentioned earlier, in terms of blocks and steals. Might not be as great of a defensive prospect individually as these other guys, but really, really, really good on that end too. So that would be a guy that I would, possibly consider if he's there. And then I think if we're talking Spurs kind of picks, I think Ousmane Dieng is somebody who could end up popping up at that spot. You just look at him coming out of France, going into the NBL, had a really, really rough start at 18 years old in the NBL. A lot of expectations. You just watched what LaMelo Ball did, Josh Giddey did, so things were bound to kind of go like that. And then second half of the season turns it on. 6'10" dude who can dribble, he can really pass it. He's got a lot of potential defensively. I think that's someone who the Spurs would definitely have their eyes on, but could be possibly a bit of a reach at 9, just considering the landscape of everybody's draft stock and things of that nature. But that's somebody who I would definitely at least consider there too.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because I really like him. I think I might be higher than him than like some other people. I have him 21st on my big board, but like a year ago, I had Josh Primo 30th on my big board. And so when they called his name at 12, I was shocked. I wasn't like, oh, I absolutely hate this pick. I was more like, oh my, I can't believe they did that. Like that's a huge upside swing. Like you're taking a huge swing there on a relative unknown. You're hoping that like all these ancillary skills sort of develop and he is what you think he is down the road. And you're okay with him not being impactful like 1-2 years. Like we saw that. Like Josh Primo, there's no nice way to put it. Like he had good flashes in the G League. He had a few flashes here and there in the NBA, but like for the most part, pretty inefficient, high turnover, fouled probably a little bit more than you wanted to, got caught on backdoor cuts. Not really the greatest shooter, at least year one. Like I think it was too small of a sample size to read into in the NBA, but like he is a project. So like another guy like Dieng, like if they take him 9th, I would probably have a similar reaction. Like really that happened? But at the same time, I could easily talk myself into it being like, all right, well, I'm fine with kind of being here for the long haul and seeing how this turns out. Because after they took Primo at 12, it would not surprise me if they did something similar this year. Dame, do you feel the same way?
No, I was actually going to talk about a different prospect. I know who y'all are talking about. I haven't watched too much on him, but yeah, I think Noah, you just have like I think you really, really like kind of those long, rangy forwards that can put the ball on the floor a little bit. Like I know you're a big like Pokashevsky guy and just like guys like that in general. Not to say that this guy's Pokashevsky.
I still like him. Yeah. I still like Pokashevsky, by the way.
Oh, I do too. Don't give. Yeah, no, I do too. But I was gonna bring up one more prospect, a guy that I've been watching a lot of, and I kind of really like a lot. Maybe higher than most, but I like Dyson Daniels a lot. I was wondering what y'all thought for the Spurs, like hypothetically, if they trade back into 14 or something like that. What you would think about him for the Spurs?
Yeah, I think that's an option at 9 too. He's in that kind of same sort of group for me. Obviously, him being a little bit more guard oriented, it makes it a little bit different than some of the other guys. But in terms of looking at this class and who are the guys who have the best chance to be positive defenders and like really get into that great tier, he's one of those guys for me. Definitely, there's rumors that he kind of grew to 6'8" even, so he might be able to play a little bit more comfortably on the wing. Obviously has some things to work on in terms of shooting, but even if you look at like what he did in the Rising Stars game, he looked apart. He fit in really well with them, just what he's able to do defensively first and foremost, and then as a passer and kind of just filling gaps, attacking closeouts, getting to the rim. He loves to use that little floater in the lane, so I think that he's a guy who could possibly be an option there for the Spurs too, even as high as 9.
Yeah, we talked about him a little bit with Corey last week, and I don't think like anything that we talked about has changed my mind that much about him. I do like him. I think he's another one of those like high field prospects. I think he's going to be a plus defensively like pretty quickly in the league. I don't know year one, but like I don't think it's going to take him that long to figure it out. And I do like him again, like we mentioned last week. Like if he is 6'8" and not 6'6", I do like him a little bit more at 6'8" than at 6'6". Like he's long, He's a little taller in that case. I think he's a really good passer. And the only real like gripe that I have with him, as like if we're going to be realistic with a prospect in that range who I have 13th on my big board, I don't think he's like that aggressive of a scorer. Like I think he's almost unselfish to a fault at times, which was like a little bit frustrating. I know there was a lot of talent on that G League Ignite team. You know, they didn't play a ton of games, so like the sample size is a lot smaller. So like I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt as like a shooter, because like you said, didn't really start off that strong, got better as the second half of the season went on. But I don't know if I would want him at 9, to be honest. I'm fine with him like a little later. Like if he's there at 20, I think no brainer, but 9, I would be a little hesitant. But that's just me. I'd just be a little bit hesitant.
Yeah, I agree. I see kind of your thought process on that, because, you know, being a guard, you have to be a little bit better. If you're not a great shooter on the spot up and things of that nature, he was a lot better, you know, percentage-wise in that second half, but in the totality of his game, it's definitely something he needs to work on. But if you're not that great spot-up shooter, you got to be able to create an advantage a little bit better. He is a good passer, but he's not somebody who's like really going to put pressure on you in that way. So that's kind of a possibility. You know, can he be a primary, or is he more, you know, secondary? So that's something I definitely see in his game. But me personally, I think that, you know, just what he can bring to the floor defensively, and you know, some of those other skills, like the guys that we've mentioned today, kind of similar, just in a little bit smaller package, I think that he can bring. And then he also is a little bit better ball handler. So that's why he's in that same mix for me.
I think that's totally fair. Like I could easily be talked into a number of different scenarios, and I definitely respect your opinion on that too. So I'm not arguing against that.
Yeah, man, it's like Doctor Strange, man. You just got a whole lot of possibilities, a whole lot of options, man. Whole lot of options. But yeah, I think for me, fellas, I think that just about wraps it up. I think that we talked about a lot of heat today, man. I like the Dyson Daniels discussion. Loved, you know, hearing what y'all had to think about, you know, Tari Eason, Jeremy Sochan, even Kendall Brown, right? A guy that we're not as high on, right? But still makes sense for the Spurs. I think a sentiment that I've echoed a million times. The Spurs are going to have a chance to get players that can really contribute and really fit what they need. So I think overall this is a pretty good discussion, fellas.
Yeah, and honestly, thank you so much for hopping on. I know this is later. Our listeners know, you know, we start at like 10 p.m. We've been doing this for an hour. It's 11. You hopped on Mother's Day. We appreciate everything you did. So go ahead and let all our Spurs fans, all the audience know, where can they find you on social media? Where can they find your basketball content, your YouTube content, all that good stuff. So we'll kick it to you and the floor is yours.
Yeah, so you can find me on YouTube. Just search up Hoop Intellect. I do a lot of draft-related content right now. We'll do a lot of other NBA stuff. You know, we did a preseason video on DeJounte Murray last year, so might be another Spur coming up in the future. So that's where you can find me on YouTube. And then on Twitter, I'm at Hoop Intellect with 3 L's. It should come up, be able to find me there. On Instagram, Hoop Intellect as well. So that's kind of my socials. I appreciate y'all for having me on. Love talking to Spurs fans. I like talking to different teams and getting their perspective on things. So this is fun.
Yeah, man, we very much appreciate you coming on. Dame, the floor is yours now. So let Spurs fans know, where can they find you?
Yeah, man. Hey, thanks for joining us, bro. I mean, I was telling him off the air, really big fan of what he does. I'm not really a fan of much in general, but I'm really a fan of Hoop Intellect and what he does, man, and just really, really good stuff, bro. Keep it up. Definitely, lifelong subscriber, bro, for, however long you do this stuff for. So, shout out to you for coming on, though, for real. Noah, shout out to you coming on, too, man. I mean, Mother's Day, we're all, really, really busy, but hey, man, 11 o'clock, you got to make things happen. So just follow me on Twitter, y'all, at DA Bartonek, same old. You see everything, Pounding the Rock, Hogs Haven, TechSite Insider, Alamo City Limits, whatever I do, it's on there. Just holler at me. But yeah, man, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and you can find me at @N_Magaro, Magaro on Twitter. You can find all of my words, all of Dame's words at Pounding the Rock for all your Spurs-related content. But that about does it. Everybody knows where else to find our podcast. So thanks again for joining us, and thanks to everybody who tuned in for this edition of Alamo City Limits. And for those of you listening at home, make sure to subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. We've got an amazing staff of writers over at Pounding the Rock who do a wonderful job of keeping everybody up to date with their favorite team. So check our stuff out. But until next time, Spurs fans, take care.